Hammer. I guess we'll technically call this meeting to order at 6:04. Sure. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Purpose of this meeting is to try to follow up. We've only had one other official meeting with regard to this. Trying to get together a plan and work on the assumptions that we worked on last week. Did everyone get a copy of those assumptions?
I think everybody got a copy, but I'm going to give, except Katie, I think I emailed them to everybody.
Yeah.
I have a copy.
I have it then, I don't have it. I might have had it, but I don't have it.
Yeah. They've been revised though. I'm sure. Wait a minute. No, maybe you have it.
There's one with a timeline at the bottom of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You have it. Good. I did send it. All right.
And what we did was Steve had come up, and I thought it was a good idea to try to get to some things on paper as to what the assumptions were as we head into this. And last meeting we were able to put together and try to come up with a plan. This is not anything set in stone, but this is trying to get something on paper. So then the whole goal here is to try to get something on paper so that we can then bring to our board as a recommendation as to what we want to do, and then come with a plan from there as to moving forward with the rest of the community. So I don't know if anyone has any revisions or modifications. Some of the things, Steve, we weren't quite sure based on some of the recommendations you had. Some of the, a little question of the language, I guess. Some of the things we, not purposely eliminated, but just took off because we weren't sure exactly what we were trying to get to.
I have some questions.
Yeah, well, that's part of this. Is just try. I knew you had some questions. Was to try to get those sort of vetted and figured out as we kind of get this off the ground.
Well, I think the first one question really has to do with student demographics. Last few years, because of the decline in housing starts and the economy and so forth, you've seen, and you just mentioned the growth in the grand list has been very small. But I think we have to look more than just the next couple of years. So that I guess my question is, what happens if we have an economic recovery in the next 3 to 5 years, which is a reasonable explanation considering the duration of the downturn so far, and we start seeing more of the trend that we saw maybe 10 years ago, which was actually people starting to move into town because we do have a reputation for a very strong school system. So I guess my question is, does it make sense for us to also put in a scenario of having some growth in student population and whether or not this arrangement could accommodate that without inordinately increasing class size? Now, we want 5%, I don't know. I think we have to look at a couple of scenarios, but I think the thing I would be concerned about is saying, currently, this plan might work. But what happens if 5 years down the line, what's our contingency plan? Would you reopen Bakerville? Well, that might affect what uses put to in the interim. So I just think we need to be thinking about that before we jump into this, because things change. And it's like people buying the stock market. They sell when it's low and they buy when it's high. Well, we don't want to do that. That's when they lose money. So that's one of my concerns. And the second concern is it says future use of the buildings of town function and has not been addressed in this study. Should we really, I think that's a big deal, because if we don't get the town to take it over, then we have some costs that we would be owing back to the state for the funding. So I think at some point we have to really address what would possibly could the town use it for, what would its cost be, so that we really look at it holistically.
I think both those are legitimate concerns, and some of the things we somewhat touched upon in the past.
Have already talked about
well, a little bit, but and not like we have any answers for them, I guess, is the real point. It's like we don't know what the population is going to be. I mean, I think we can accommodate, and correct me if I'm wrong, an increase in student population as long as we maintain 4 sections. But once we go back, if we ever went back to the 5 section thing like we've had in the past, I don't think 2 buildings would be sufficient. Is that fair to say, Philip? I mean,
Not based on your assumptions here when you say additional classrooms are required for art, music, physical ed, Spanish, special ed, band, chorus, language. And unless you started to convert other designated spaces into classrooms, then no, I don't think you could support, certainly maybe 1 or 2, but if you had to do every section 5, it went up to something like what we had when I started here.
so that is a legitimate concern. And this kind of feeds into your other thing is what to do with the building. If you look at the statute, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see it.
I don't think I have a copy of it. I think you passed it out somewhere, and I did read it at one point, and I don't have it in my copy.
I mean, one of the real issues here is that the statute's 10-283, and basically what it says is that we have a money outstanding owed on Bakerville, and the start date for that payback, according to the documentation we have received, is when the Board of Education accepted the building, which was not until January of 2006. That basically puts us on a 10-year hook to repay that money up until 2016. You can go before the State Board of Ed and request a waiver so long as that if the building is, quote, is redirected for public use. So the question becomes,
Okay, thank you. Yes, I just filled this out, yeah.
in order to receive that waiver, it has to be redirected for public use. What that public use, though, I don't think is really our decision to make, though, in terms of, while I think in coordination with other aspects of the town, but I think our decision would be like, well, we're going to close this, turn this over to the town, but we need it to be used in a certain way or for this function like that. I don't think it's beyond our scope as to what that building would be if we were no longer using it.
I agree with you that I don't think we are there to determine what it is, but I think if we're looking at the costs to be saved, if there is not a use that the town could give us that would allow us to go seek the waiver, then we would lose a chunk of cost savings.
Right.
And I think somehow, I don't feel it would be appropriate to go forward with this recommendation without at least having some form of commitment, either from the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance or somebody, that they have a plan. I think it's a contingency plan. Because otherwise, all of these cost savings, I wouldn't say all of them, but I forget exactly what it would be if we were not giving the cost of the town to continue to repay the loan back unless the town's willing to go ahead and do it. And that's the other question. But I think we have to address it before we make final recommendations.
I'm with you completely. It's I personally don't think it's worth undertaking if we can't get other groups in town to get on board to convert this to public use. The cost that we would have to pay back doesn't warrant paying that penalty and then going forward and then supporting the buildings. We still have to keep it maintained. We can't just let it lay fallow and do nothing with it. So, it really does require that we kind of get, this converted to a public use. And that's like, how do we get to that point, I guess is the point. Is that's part of this meeting is, what steps are we going to take to try to bring this forward, get this properly vetted, package it together for our board, package it together to either the Board of Selectmen and or the Board of Finance, what other people we want to get involved, what other community input we want on the whole matter, and also try to narrow the focus as to what's really at stake here, which is, to me, it's the use of the building itself, and not, it doesn't go beyond that to other school areas. So that's where we are, and that's kind of a little bit what we're wrestling with, is how to really, what's a proper procedure to go about doing this.
Do you think that we really just need to take the next step and bring it to the community?
I don't know if I think it's premature to bring to the community because, it depends on what part of the community. Obviously, there's the families whose kids may be already in Bakerville. You weren't on the board, but you might have been sitting in the audience when we were talking bus routes changes, and when we start redrawing the infamous line, it creates all sorts of problems. Well, obviously there's going to be families who are going to have one take on it. But then we also have other people who are going to want to know, you know, is this something so important we support it because we save money? So we really, I think, have to really understand the financial implications before we can even bring it to the community to then get the next level of reaction, which is, you know, are the families, are we gonna have an issue with families? Everybody loves their community schools, so the only reason you can convince people that maybe an alternative is required is when it hits, you know, taxes and the bottom line.
Well, I think that there is going to be definitely a cost involved, but I think more importantly for our perspective is just the more efficient use of our staffing and the use of our buildings and how we do things. I mean, to spread us out over 3 buildings, I don't think educationally is the best way to go.
Especially now when we're just down to 2 sections per grade, it's not allowing for the collaboration between
Exactly.
the teachers the way they would like it to be, and the way we would, you know, ideally.
I agree.
They're trying to use Skype or they're going across town and, you know, doing that, so it's just not the most efficient use of their time. You know, so it goes beyond just the cost of it.
Oh, I mean, it's a cost
But-
benefit
right,
analysis.
right.
You really gotta look at what are the benefits of this educationally. And what are, you know, cost savings, that's a benefit. But then I think you have to put together a package, so maybe we need to start, you know, step 1, outlining the educational benefits, so we can make a case to parents. Getting in, maybe there's input from, I don't know, PTO, having an opportunity to talk or get their input.
Yeah, I think we do need input as well as we need to make people aware of what we're planning on doing. And I don't know what comes first, you know, do we go out to as a community thing? Do we go out to our other boards in town and say this is what we're thinking of? Do we want to get them involved in some of these decisions? It's a kind of hard thing to get off the ground, you know, much harder than I originally anticipated, I'll be honest with you.
There's a lot of
I'm
it.
feeling a little stuck.
Feeling a little bit, and you know, a little stuck at the moment, trying to figure out the best plan of attack for this.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is we just have to break it down into pieces. What is it we need to know? Then we figure out who needs to be involved in getting us to, you know, involved in the discussion so that we get the appropriate input. And then we need to research some things that I think have a potential impact on the financial issues. So
Well, I think Philip's done a pretty good job so far as kind of laying out some of the potential cost savings, and obviously some of those in any scenario. I mean, you look at the staffing going to change, but some of the operational savings, while it's going to save on our budget, but then that somewhere else it would go to someone else's budget. So we have to make sure that that's made aware that it's still going to have to be heated, it's still going to have to be electrified, it's still going to have to be maintained, etc. So, there are going to be some costs that would have to be shifted over to someone else. And to answer your other question, and it's something I envision, and this may be in a perfect world, is to try to have a contingency plan. Is the idea perhaps that we turn over for public use, but built into that is some sort of understanding, and even in writing, that if there's a future need, that we could then notify the town and seek to build it back. And that would be the ideal world. Maybe like a 3-year, 2-year, something like that. Renewable lease sort of option, or I'm not sure the proper term or the way to properly do it, but that if we can see that our population is increasing and would need the building again, that we would have to give notice within a certain period of time. This is where we're going, and to make people aware, and that we would have the option for the building back. That's the only way to prepare for the future. That
from that, along those lines, I mean, you have 38 classrooms between Hartford Elementary and Wayne. So if you're saying that we need 27 for minimum of 27 as we are right now, if you were to add 5 more, that would require you to have 33, right? So that leaves approximately
27, 5, and 32.
How many
Yeah,
classrooms?
32,
We have
excuse me.
38 total classrooms?
Well, I don't know, I'm
Yeah,
gonna ask him
double
what he
check.
called classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only one that I didn't call a classroom was, the aftercare I called a classroom. 'Cause we've had that as a classroom
At
before.
Antolini,
At Antolini.
which one is it, what number is that?
That would be room 40. The one that goes down alongside the multi-purpose room.
Room 40 band? Looks small.
It was a classroom at one time.
Room 40.
And that also calls room 37 and 36 classrooms. And room 38 would stay as a non-classroom. I mean, we can argue about a classroom here and there.
They're
but-
very small
but-
rooms.
But you have 32 classrooms that you need. That would leave you 6 extra rooms. That would not include, you'd already have your library media center at Antolini. So you'd need, depending on if you're saying you want, you'd obviously, if you were to expand to 5, you'd have to do some consolidation with your extra rooms. But you'd still have 6 rooms, which would be available. Now, I
Well,
realize
well,
we're
let-
talking 2 schools, so
Yeah.
you'd need more rooms.
So look at New Hartford. So if you theoretically have another section of kindergarten, another section of grade 1, and another section of grade 2, is that what you're thinking? So that'd be 3 additional classrooms. So, because you've got reach in there, you've got your pre-K, pre-K actually probably.
Yeah, I mean, we can't plan for every scenario, but 38 classrooms with one of our assumptions is that there is trends in student population will remain steady or decrease. So there is some room for expansion. I mean, we actually never went to 5 full classrooms for every grade.
Right, 1 short.
Right, so to really think that we'd ever really need Bakerville in the near future would be somewhat unrealistic.
I think certainly within the 3 to 5 year time frame that Katie was talking about, I think would be unrealistic. But
I mean, I'm just saying, if all of a sudden you had an influx in your kindergarten and your first grade classes and that's usually where small class size tends to get some of the early grades that parents are most concerned. So I'm just saying, if that happened, do we have a way to accommodate that? And I guess I'm a little concerned that without some renovations, we would have a hard time taking some of those rooms because they're very small, you have to break down walls maybe.
I think if you count the rooms,
But
there is only 1 room, 2 rooms that, so you knock 2 off and call it 36 rooms.
I'm just saying that there's another. And the only other question I have is our library media center at Antolini, which has gotten a lot of attention for need of renovations, bookshelves. Just a question, is it going to accommodate more students?
Well, seeing as the building was designed, and we also had an extra 3 classrooms there already,
I'm just asking for
I
an
don't see
educational
why
perspective.
you couldn't accommodate it, but, if we're looking for reasons not to do it.
No, I'm just saying I want to make, as those issues come up and I think it's important, in a way I'm playing a little devil's advocate
Right.
ahead of
No, I
time
hear you, but-
because I'm not
That's a question.
But we're not adding any space to this building.
I know, it's a fixed amount of space, so I
Right.
just
We're not
also
adding
say.
classrooms. If we were to add classrooms, then yeah, I could see where you could say that it might not be big enough. You might not have enough bathrooms.
I don't know, I'm just saying, just assuming that what would the change in student population be in this? Approximately.
We don't even have a scenario.
If we had, well,
it's
if
based
this,
off our current population.
but even of current population, what would be the change in the numbers of students at Antolini and New Hartford compared to, New Hartford has a lot of room, I'm not worried about that, I'm thinking of Antolini.
I think New Hartford's tighter. I think New Hartford gives you more problems, no? If you want to maintain
Well, basically, I think to answer your question,
kindergarten,
you're moving grade 2 now up to Antolini in this
So
scenario.
you're moving 75 kids.
okay, so
So
that's,
it'd be a plus 75
we'd be moving
kids.
grade 2 there.
But you're not you're not saying, it's not a net 75 because some of our largest classes in the next, well, for the past 3 years have been leaving, and then will continue for another 3 more years till we get to that present second grade, which is at 75, 74, 76, somewhere
Right.
around there. So this is not a net gain at Anthony of 75 because every year you're losing 10
some of the larger classes
or
you're expecting.
12 or 13 kids.
But we graduated a couple years ago, class like 96, and we graduated like a class like 75.
Just a year.
This last
Yeah,
year was
just a
sixth grade class.
So,
And then the fifth grade class is the second grade.
So under those,
The
yeah,
sixth grade class.
you'd have
is-
a hard time with grade 2 there, you'd have a hard time going to 5 sections at Anfield. If you had grade 2 through 6 in there.
if you-
Oh, I see. You had 4 additional classrooms.
I think you could still do it, but.
Well, as I
Lot
said
more.
before, I think you're gonna have to redesignate rooms then. Obviously, Spanish, maybe.
Right, if you had to go to
Science
5,
room,
you'd
maybe
have
we'd have
to.
to consider Oak Hill maybe leaving,
Well, you definitely have to.
So then we're
which is
just,
Yeah.
income for the town.
Well, that should be one of the offsetting costs, is if, if you had to, I mean,
Right.
just thinking about it, then, okay, we don't get the revenue from Oakville. But at least it's a way to keep the school intact.
and also, so then we would just have pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. And then does that cause educational issues or, like, with the teachers? It's not having enough camaraderie with other teachers. 'Cause there's still gonna be just the same amount of teachers there, right?
Yeah, but you're gonna have cohorts,
Right.
grade level cohorts,
Right.
which is something that we're not having now.
I mean,
You know,
that's
we're not,
Which is
we're
more
having now,
important.
but we're obviously, it's a little bit more of an effort to,
Right.
as you said, move from one building to the other, Skype one another, whatever.
and we've also built into this new contract some after-school planning time for the teachers, so in order to effectuate that better, it'd be helpful if they were started off in the same building.
I mean, I think this is feasible, but I just wanna make sure that we have taken into account things that could come up as issues, that we've got an answer to them.
And do we have, I'm gonna play a little devil's advocate, you're sticking kids literally on bus from where I live, which is as far as you can possibly go, like literally on the Burlington line, and sending them across all the way here, and they make it in the time that we have allocated. And then what does it do to bus routes?
We've done a couple of preliminary,
Right.
I have a preliminary bus routes. I asked them, I don't think we met after the last time. So they're proposing that there would have to be some switching of buses, unless you added buses. There would be some switching of buses at Antolini, and then there would be some switching of buses at New Hartford. They would have, these kids that are going up there would have to switch buses, and those kids are coming down here. So there'd be some switching of buses, and I don't completely have it in my mind here. But, which obviously adds to bus time as well, because they're switching buses.
But I'm
They have to
wondering
wait,
if it
transfer.
might save money though, because you'd be having more students taking a single route. I mean, you already have, based on grade level, the buses having to transport kids from all over town to Antolini once they hit currently 4th grade. Now you can add some kids to them.
Yeah, the difference is that the Antolini bus kind of,
No, I don't
Handles the
think so.
Baker
No,
bill.
never mind, it's gonna probably cost us
Well,
money.
that's all on this side.
I know.
You know,
On the other end, everybody's
right,
going to.
I mean, on the other
Harvard.
side. Right, the only people that have their own buses are the New Hartford elementary kids
right.
now, and then, well, if there's kids coming straight from here, of this side of town, going to that are not sharing buses with New Hartford, is that correct? I don't know how the bus routes happen.
It gets complicated.
Ask me that question again.
Are there buses on this side of town? Are they picking up the New Hartford elementary kids, dropping them off, and then going to Antolini? Or are there two separate buses that pick up?
I think the answer to that question is separate buses.
Because I know like on our side,
I know the answer.
yeah.
There's no bus that stops in New Hartford and then goes to.
Okay.
I mean, the initial take from DATCO is that there really would be no change, but I personally have a hard time believing that.
Well, then
It seems
when I
like
push the issue now, and if you see these bus lists, and you see the 20-minute, 15-minute extra time for the kids that stop in New Hartford and then go up to Antolini School, you know. Otherwise, you have to add some buses.
Yeah, that transfer of buses is not gonna be popular.
And that's not gonna be a popular thing. You know, New Hartford tried to do that
Used
before.
to do it.
They used to do it?
Yeah, when they did it at the firehouse.
People didn't like it.
Why would you do it at the fire?
A little more central or something?
Which
That's what they
firehouse?
did. Firehouse, West Hill.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it there either.
Really? Were you on the board when that was going on?
Could see if they switch at one of the schools, but I don't know about some random location.
Well, it would just be
You know,
something.
I would think
Depends
you
what you
as
want.
a subcommittee would want, I mean, you got preliminary bus information, but I think what you would do is you would ask that to
Come up with a
meet
complete
with you.
plan and cost,
But
yeah.
but would meet with you
Yeah.
to answer some of the questions that you have.
I mean, I think that's gonna be the biggest, one of the biggest issues if we bring this forward. When we talk to families in town, that's gonna be the issue that it's part of the issue.
You know, then you got two buses, because you have kindergartners and in the afternoon. And historically, kindergartners in the afternoon from our side of town. So then it's a whole, maybe that's not as much of a problem, the afternoon kindergarten. Because then they're just going directly there. But you're still gonna have to bring over the first graders.
Yeah, it's having to require shifting around the buses, so there's whether we find a central location to transfer, would probably be the way to go about doing it, unless you have a bus which could significantly eat into some of your savings. And also just as we, keep in mind is that this is also, we can make all the bus routes we want based off of where kids live now, but we don't have any idea where kids are gonna live, 5 years from now, what those bus routes will mean. So.
It's not so cut and dry.
No.
When was it that the expansion on Italy was shut down?
That was like 1990.
Yeah, it's a couple different times. It wasn't an expansion, it was a new building up on the hill.
Yeah.
Had to be early 2000s the last time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right before. And we did, well, I went through the town.
All right, so what do we need to do to try to get this solidified? We have some cost savings estimates. And those, I assume those are still fairly valid?
Well, yeah, I think they are. I haven't looked at them since, a month ago, but yeah, I mean, obviously they're not gonna change.
Those were the same ones we had at the first meeting, right?
Yes. These, Steve? I have one.
Take another one if you have it.
They're in here, Steve. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have it.
It's in that packet.
It's just hard because even if you just take cost savings, even if there wasn't cost savings, still the whole education aspect.
And I think that should be our focus for the most part, is,
I think we're agreeing that the educational is better, no?
yes.
I think so.
So really based off of that, I mean, I'm not saying the cost savings is moot, but it's, from our perspective, I think it's more secondary, and obviously it's important because it is gonna, there will be some savings there, but it's really the educational benefit that, really should be our focus as we're trying to fix this.
Going back to the one school thing, what was the plan for that school?
For the school,
Yeah. It would have had everybody at the same campus?
there was gonna be a K2 building on the hill. Separated. It's pretty substantially separated as I remember.
Up where the playground is, up there, there was a second
Even
building?
further back, up in the woods.
Really?
Yeah.
Hey, Melissa.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Never stop doing conferences on the same day as meetings.
I know.
I had initially requested a Tuesday night, and then I backpedaled and was like, can I schedule them on Thursday?
I know, I changed mine a little bit, but Tara did me a favor by giving me the first one, so I turned out to.
Thanks for
Again,
coming. No, I know, it's tough trying to,
sorry, just keep going.
but just to update you, we're just trying to go through all the things that kind of was in the paperwork we had before.
Okay.
We talked about last meeting. We're trying to just come up with a plan, what the best way is, sort of, you know, what's the next step from here. We have some preliminary layout of what, you know, two buildings will look like. We have some preliminary cost things. We have some preliminary assumptions that seem to be, everyone seems to be okay with. I don't know if we want to change those in any way. But I guess the next question that I'm trying to get a handle of is, you know, where do we take it from here? How do we get it out? Do we go to some kind of community conversation situation? We approach our board of selectmen and our board of finance, like, here's what we're trying to do. Here's the statute. Are you guys on board? I don't know what comes first with this. I really don't. I'm trying to get a handle of what the next step would be.
I definitely think there does have to be a, community conversation or something of that nature, because there's clearly notion in this town that closing a school would automatically be a huge cost. And I think that the only way we're gonna spell that thinking is by having it really fleshed out. I don't know that, kinda hard to, I don't know how we get all that information. Without including a bigger group of people. In terms of maybe a person from the Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen or, I don't know. I feel really stuck. Especially probably being relatively new to town, I don't know all the history and stuff. There seems to be something.
Well, I think if you look at surrounding communities, you will see the same struggle that actually probably has progressed the next step, but has come back and sometimes in a negative way. I mean, we hear about Torrington's promoting a school closure, then not, or Winstead now. Look at Region 12, 2 of the 3 towns voted to close and reconsolidate the elementary schools, and they back up from that plan. It's a very challenging thing for a town to do.
I think if we, I think that if we're gonna move forward, we need to have a public hearing. But I also believe that if we wanted to put a, trial run together for Board of Finance and Selectmen, something like that, you know, that we could gather some information and input from them, and then go to a public hearing on it. But just because we're saying that this is what we can do, doesn't mean that's what we have to do. I mean, we wanna go to those things to get information and to come back and, make any potential changes or abandon ship or move forward.
Does anyone think it's worthwhile to seek additional members of this committee through other boards that exist, i.e. the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, to get them on board, to hear some input from there at this point, before we even go beyond there, say, look, here's where we
He may have
are?
also said that he would, if we needed his input, he'd be willing to help.
I just, I have to say, going to the Board of Finance meeting the other day, I was a little surprised. I felt, I mean, that's probably in a bad or good way, but more just, from the feedback I've been getting from people in the town, just by talking, because I've only been living here 5 years, which I guess I'll be that young bee until I've been here like 50 from when I'm old. So, I've been talking to people, like, you know, just people who work in the town too, that work for our school administration, our faculty, I mean, and live here. And they've said, you know, last time around, this was supposed to propose, but they had no plan for the building, and so everyone voted against it. There was like just a lot of feedback. I felt like at the Board of Finance meeting, people were actually kind of open to this idea, more than what I've been hearing in the past. And I was surprised just because I think that maybe people are realizing, you know, it doesn't have to be a bad thing if we do plan it out. And there's some real positives that can happen here if we look at this building as a part of our community that we can maybe use for some other reason. So I agree that I think it would be beneficial to us, instead of working independently on our own, if we do bring in, I know even with the teacher's contract, how successful that went by having been involved, maybe that would help us, because then we aren't, you know, a ship in the night, you know, hoping to make it through the fog. Instead, we can stay, you know, everyone's together. Whether we agree or not, that's not the point, but at least we're all communicating together and working towards a common goal, which is something that will be good for this town, and not just closing a building. And that's just how I'm looking at it as a resident, not a board of ed member, personally.
Well, that would also suggest maybe you want somebody, I don't know, I've heard that the senior center, they feel that their space is inadequate, so maybe we ought to get someone from, you know, to represent them. Definitely ask for a representative from the Board of Finance. Is there any other, are there any recreation?
The rec department in general.
Well, I mean, is that an issue? They report to the Board of Selectmen, but,
Well, I just think
Maybe
that,
Dan can assign someone.
I mean, the thing is, I mean, once again, I'm just going back to the statute, it says it has to be redirected to public use. And I think that the determination of how that building is used, once it does that, is no longer in our, well, we can
Right.
seek input and things like that, come up with a plan, but as a Board of Ed, we're not gonna have a say in that
Right.
anymore.
But
I
at
think
least
that
we
then
can
would
say-
shift to the Board of Selectmen, and so my kind of feeling is that unless the Board of Selectmen is really on board on this and can come up with this, then we don't really go too much further beyond that, if we can't really get, you
Maybe
know,
have an
consensus
initial
there
meeting
too.
then and figure out where we are at, instead of, because I talked to some of the board of selectmen, and I don't think there's even an agreement on them. I mean, I think I think everyone's kind of has their own opinion right now, which is great, everyone should have their own opinion.
Right.
But I think maybe we should all sit together and say, you know, because no matter what, yeah, we're a board of ed, but we all live in this town. And the last thing I think everyone here can agree on this one, I don't want to waste any of my time. So rushing down here after going to a conference, running home, getting dinner, getting everything else, and coming down here to sit and talk about something that 3 other groups are like, they're crazy, is it gonna happen?
Right.
I'd rather not waste my time. So I'd rather sit
Completely
together
with you.
and patch it out and then come up with where we're going and then do the work.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to mean bring them on
Right.
board onto the committee, or it's just, let's bring the groups together.
Well, you wouldn't wanna have them on the committee until you have a sense that that's
Right.
where you wanna go, and then you
Right.
maybe join, why don't you ask if we could have a joint board meeting?
Between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, all, at
Board
all
of
boards,
Education.
to talk about this issue.
Right.
Lay it out there.
And we present some preliminary information that is just that, preliminary information. This is the legislation, here is a preliminary cost estimate, here is a, map of how the school would be used, here are the bus routes,
and here are the issues we still
And-
have
Right.
to
And
look
here are the
into,
things
but
we haven't
we're,
answered
but
yet,
we're
but we
not
don't
going
wanna
to.
go any
Right,
further
right.
until
Yeah.
we have a sense that this is a direction that the town would like us to pursue.
Because we admit, well, at least I can admit, it's not, this isn't perfect. I mean, we'll have to have more buses maybe, which that might go up. It might not. I mean, this whole thing isn't perfect, so,
By no means,
you know,
no.
we're willing to say, and maybe somebody out there has a better idea. You know, who knows? I mean, I'd love to hear one. Right now, I'm open to any suggestions, and that's why I think we should hear from everybody. I know we need to, our call to determine whether or not we need the building, but,
I think we pretty much determined that we don't.
Yeah, I think we determined we really
yeah,
don't
do
need the
we
building.
need to, like, talk about that in a regular meeting and make a, like, to actually decide on that? Does that have to be official
I
at
think
some point in time?
I think that's a little premature at this
Can't
point
the
to,
roads tell you that you don't need it.
Right.
I mean, I think it's looking very much like that, but I think again, before we make any motions as a board,
Right.
I think we have to have more information about transportation, and that's a big deal, and that's
It
gonna
is.
be a bone of contention potentially, as well as possibly enlist some feedback about potentially what uses. Not that I agree, we don't
Right.
make the decision on the uses, but do we get the town's Board of Finances and Selectmen's acceptance of their responsibility to come up with alternative uses? Otherwise, you're just throwing money at an empty building.
Right.
So I think we want their statement of intent that they think they could use, come up with something
Yeah.
to benefit the town.
No, I missed the beginning, I apologize, but there was some talk the other day with Board of Finance and, not the Board of Finance, but just among people that we should try to look at this sooner. Are we still in the same time frame that looking at this for not this coming September, but next September if we needed to?
Geez, I mean, could it potentially be fast-tracked if we have a meeting like
That's
that?
what I'm wondering. Is that on the
With the
table?
Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and our board and get fast-tracked?
Well, I mean, the only thing you still have to go for this waiver process, so I don't
And
know
it's the
how
state-
long
the
that would
state
take.
might
Yeah,
slow
it
us
is a
down
state
a
part of
little bit.
education, so the idea that even if we decided everyone was on board right now, today,
We'd never get that on the agenda, they only meet, and,
But
they
that,
don't meet all summer.
right, that could also be a potential thing where we say, okay, well, this is what's left on a loan, and if we don't end up getting the waiver, this is a cost that we would eat. Are you willing to eat this? Because it was something like $250,000. And if we're gonna make more than that, or if it's gonna help our budget in the long run, even for this year, if we eat that cost,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it's-
I know it's not
Right.
appealing, but
No, it's not.
it's kinda.
to me, I don't like the idea of eating that cost as well as just keeping a building with nothing going on.
Right,
That would
that's what
just-
bothers me more.
I mean,
than
I think we
yeah.
need to-
But I mean, here we're saying that we don't need the space.
Right.
I mean, I'm saying that.
Yeah,
No, I agree.
yeah, I think we all agree.
And that it's better for education if we move the grades together. I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that that's the direction we wanna go.
Right, but, I mean, what are you talking about, like September? Or are you
I
just
mean,
saying
when
in
it
general?
happens, I mean, it happens.
Right,
But I mean, we can, if we agree that we don't need the space and that it's better for education, then why wouldn't we go in that direction?
I agree with you, but I guess I'm finding, if it was just me with my personality and you just asked me before I moved here, but I'd make a decision, agree with you, move forward. But I find like, people I've met in this town, and just, maybe it's a smaller town, or just the people the way they are, I honestly, I find people, the change and the concept a little hard to swallow. So I feel like maybe, let's embrace that by getting everybody on board, and then we can work together instead of trying to
I'm not against
fight
working
against each
together.
other.
I'm just saying that if we can't agree amongst ourselves, and you don't think that you're gonna get anybody else to agree with it. I
Right,
mean, there's 5 of us here.
we agree, I think we
I think
agree,
we
I
do
agree with
all
what
Well,
you're
agree,
saying,
it's just a
so-
matter of trying to figure out what's the next step.
Yeah.
How do we, we take an agreement that yes, it's better educationally for us, and we don't need the building. So taking those two two premises. I think we all agree with that. The point is, how do we get it to the next step? And that's what I'm trying to wrestle with.
I think that's exactly is where I am.
And, you know, it might not be a bad idea to bring it before, ask to put it on the next Board of Finance agenda, because, you know, this, you know, our selectmen, two of them at least attend those regularly,
Right.
so maybe get the third one there too, and ask for the joint meeting through that venue. I don't wanna get too bogged down with this, with the other budget stuff, because the timing of this isn't great, just because it's kind of throwing another thing at people.
Something, you know?
It is, you're right, there's always gonna be something in the way, but, you know, if we can ask to possibly put it on the agenda there, and we come in with the information we have, and then bring it to them and say, here's where we are, these two premises, you know, based off of that, here's this other documentation, and get some feedback from there is where we wanna go. Maybe that's the best way at this point to handle it.
Yeah, I'm fine with, I do 100%, I'm in agreement with what Steve's saying, that yeah, educationally, I constantly, even listening to Philip, professional development, teachers, when I'm picking up, I see teachers pulling in, driving out, it's just a constant moving around, and you're wasting time. You know, technically losing money, you know, every time you drive, they're driving around town.
No,
It's unnecessary.
Physical resources too.
Right,
Computers.
sharing resources, that's true,
Computers,
yeah. Technology,
So
yeah.
why don't you as the chair, see
Right,
if
the big
Ben
one,
and Dan would be willing to have a joint board meeting, all board meeting, not all board, joint board meeting.
And if it's something they wanna do outside of a regular Board of Finance meeting, we just pick another night for it.
Right, you take a Board of Education night, so that your rest of your board could also hear it, because we don't have the full board here.
Okay.
And then we just break it into sections, you know, we'll go over the assumptions. Again, it's just, this is preliminary information, we don't wanna do anything more until we know what the sense is from these groups.
Okay. Now, let's gotta go through, based off of that, what we would be submitting in terms of documentation.
I think too, Maria just made a good point, which I don't even know if we've actually touched upon things like that.
We'll talk to you later. Thanks.
Steve. Things like, the fact that technology, being able to pool technology in one or two buildings instead of three buildings, because, you know, Bakerville and New Hartford are complete redundancy, we have a computer lab in each place. And now we're trying to upgrade computers in the classrooms, you know, would be a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, no, there's no question.
So we definitely want to get some transportation information, you know, somewhat consolidated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go through some of the stuff we do have and then just kind of talk about that in terms of what we would submit.
Okay.
First and foremost for me is the statute, because that kind of lies on what we can
Right.
do. You know, that's the guidelines is what it is. Now, you had also given this stuff, and I just want to try to get, you know, I hand wrote this number, 588,841. That was what I understand was the total amount of these, and it's been a little while. I just want to kind of firm up, and I don't know if this is the accurate number that I wrote it in, but it's not reflected on any of these other sheets, but it's basically what the total amount of the state portion of the reimbursement that they gave us. We try to hone that in so that we know exactly what that figure would be. Because that just kind of outlines the real cost associated with it. Busy. Just, you may have missed this, but I'll just refresh real quickly. I think the plan is gonna be that we all kind of agree that educationally it'd be better to not only have 2 days as well, as we really don't need the space. So what we're gonna look to do is to have at a joint meeting with the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, whatever the venue, time, place, we determine, we'll ask them. And then we're gonna submit our preliminary stuff to them and try to get an idea where they're gonna go from. So from what we're trying to do at this point is just come up with a list of sort of documents that we would have to be present to people, so that they, you know, this is what we need to at least get off the ground with.
Right, and I think, again, having a list of still unresolved questions, just to be upfront saying, you know, if we get the support to go forward, then we would also, before we would make a final recommendation, we have to know the buses. I think the transportation issues.
Transportation is really the biggest one.
And we need to get a sense as to whether or not the town's willing to accept the responsibility for coming up with an alternative use. But we also need to know the cost for just keeping the building heated. You can't abandon it.
Right.
Is that in here?
That is in the
That was
the
under
cost
savings,
summary.
it is in the cost, because I have savings,
Well,
but I don't have
wouldn't you
costs.
assume
Okay,
that the
like,
cost
yeah, it'd
savings
be
is
there
what it
as
would,
expense.
roughly, that's what it would cost to get it, because that's
Well,
what
that's
I'm
what
working
I'm
with
at.
current numbers.
Right, so they're not really operations, some of these aren't, because you still have some, if it's has to be kept,
Right, we're looking at
Board of
purely in
Ed
terms
savings.
of Board of Ed,
Yeah.
exactly.
Board of Ed, but then
So
I think
obviously-
the town needs to know of these things, which ones would be under, you know, you had unemployment costs, but you might need to add to that building.
Yeah, I mean-
Somebody, maybe it isn't our Board of Ed, but somebody's gonna have to.
Well, I mean, yeah, there'd be a shift basically of,
A shift.
of the
Right.
operational cost to,
Right, but as far as the town goes, they have to, I think you have to look at it then.
yeah. All right, we're gonna run out of time here
Yeah.
before our next meeting, so let's try to get a list of documents.
Okay.
Statute, some kind of documentation that reflects what is
Yep, I got
outstanding
it.
to the state. The assumptions that we've put together, assumption timeline, and this is all preliminary. I think the building plans that we have here, these two that show the classrooms as the other two good ones.
We have to consolidate the
Yeah,
preliminary estimate of consolidation plan cost
Right.
savings.
Maybe if we broke that out to separate out what would definitely be a savings, because it's a Board of Ed, like, nurse, you know, we separated this according to like what Katie's trying to say of, operational savings is great, but maybe not,
We ought to have an offsetting cost of those
Yeah,
things,
like-
most likely somebody cost could, and could, no, to town, not to
Right.
board.
Well, personally, I think, I mean, this is my own take.
Yeah.
I think we should, I do, but I think how we have them here is fine.
For
personally,
now?
Because, for now, just because some of these will be tossed over, but, you know, they're not gonna, like in-district travel, that would not then go to the town.
Probably be
Uh,
fuel and electricity.
Leases and copying would then not go to the
That'll
town.
be maintenance,
Let's
you're
read it.
still
So,
gonna have some
alright.
maintenance
There's gonna be
costs.
some, but not
how
all.
about we just fix this to consolidation, you know, Board of Ed savings, so just, so that if this gets passed around, people aren't realizing that this is a Board of Ed savings,
Right.
not town savings.
Okay, fair enough.
And then that will make it clear.
Clear that it's ours and not
On the
anyone else.
assumptions, do we want to get rid of that last one, or based on recent trends?
Well, I
So-
mean, I think you have to say, will remain steady or decrease for the foreseeable three, I mean,
I'm reluctant to even put a time frame on it, 'cause how do
Yeah.
we know? I mean, what are we
Yeah.
basing that
I
off
don't
of?
know.
You're saying, based on recent trends, student population will remain
May
steady. Based
remain,
on recent trends, now if you get next year's trends that are going the
Start
other
going up,
direction,
yeah.
then you
I mean, the only thing you could do is there are people who do, it would be a cost,
Right.
enrollment
We talked
projections,
about this.
and they look at birth rates, and you can actually get census data, and look at changing birth rates in town, and that, then you play out.
and
We
you
have a
have
very
those, and
snowy
we
winter
have,
last year.
we have paid for that, New Hartford has paid for these analyses before, and they haven't necessarily come out.
Right, because there's a lot of
Right.
other, there's a lot of other
We'd be
factors.
better off pulling the town, asking everyone who
Well,
has a
just
kid,
look
and
at the
if you
history.
plan on enrolling them, do better.
Right, I mean, if you look at this enrollment that was projected to 2016, this was, I guess, done in 2006, it would have had next year's class, you're looking at 12, 13, that's 605 students, and we're at,
Below six, way below 60 right now.
we're gonna be at
564?
570 or something.
No.
Five, I don't know, the budget. It's
570-ish.
I have a budget right here.
It says it right there on.
Yeah.
Do we want to put somewhere
I
that,
gotta just gotta go upstairs.
Yeah, it's
I
fine.
gotta get ready for the next meeting.
And that just goes, but when you look at that, if they were saying that we were supposed to have 605,
That's
and
not that big.
it's really not that big a difference, so it's not that far off.
What's that?
Well, I was saying, like, you know, if they were saying 605 for 12, 13, and you have that figure?
569.
It's not that far off, we're talking
Yeah,
36
it's not
kids.
bad. Well,
Not huge.
yeah, but that's a two class, that's a
Yeah,
pretty
I
good,
guess it is, it's an
so,
do we want to put
and that is way
somewhere-
down from this current class is 581, we lost a lot of kids just this past school year. With that whole grade that went down.
Do we want to put an assumption that, and I guess it's more than an assumption, that we think it's beneficial for educational reasons, that we do, and we don't have a need for today anymore, we think educational needs better.
Consolidating the grades is educational.
But it just, who's defining? The thing that we have talked about most relative to education is the fact that now groups of teachers can work as co-leads. So we haven't said, why is that important for kids and their age? We really haven't fleshed that out.
Well, that might
So
be
be
separate,
careful,
maybe we need.
before you make
yeah.
that, you have to have maybe some data, some,
Well, maybe that's something
information
that
that
you or
shows.
your principals can, or Steve
you
or
know, it's
whatever can set
subjective
the.
information right now. I believe that it would be better for our teachers to be able to work as cohort teams in the same building.
But even just the whole, the two schools having, you know, consistency with what is being taught, how it's being taught, what they're doing, respect assemblies, just the whole, everything. You don't even need the, you know, the professional development side of it. I'm thinking of what are our kids getting. Not to say they're getting anything better or worse on each side, but, you know, I know they do a Thanksgiving event over in New Hartford, they don't do that at Bakerville. You know, maybe they could all do it if they were together. You know, just little
Well, I think
things
that's
like
probably
that.
for you to somewhat flesh out during these discussions
Yeah.
as to why. I mean, you've been telling me for a very long time that this, you know, would be better this way.
Well, I'm thinking of it more of a teacher, but, you know, do we have the data? Is it the test score? You know, are people gonna say to us, prove to us that it's gonna
Right.
impact student learning?
But I think there are things you can talk about, you know, there's a lot more than test scores.
Right,
For student
mentoring,
learning,
I mean,
it's-
there's
it's-
so many
Just
positives.
collaboration.
Yeah,
Yeah, and even kids and,
Yeah.
you know, they're.
Do you want to include this? What were the
Yeah, social
projections?
I think you can come up
You
with
gave me
some
that.
stuff that is firm enough.
I think you
I
and I
bet you we
will
could
sit
Google
down
a few things.
We're gonna have to do this a little more of this.
in this educational piece. We can put all those points, but why do we think this is gonna be benefit children?
But I think
period?
it's professionals, educators can make certain assumptions without going overboard. I mean, I think it's, you know, you're gonna better utilize time for collaboration, you're going to have an opportunity to facilitate consistency even more so than we are currently trying now. I mean, these are.
Oh, yeah, your building superintendent said that, actually, Sarah Small wasn't, he used to be her father.
All right, we're gonna adjourn this particular meeting just because we're out of time, but at least we have a plan in place. Thank you, everyone.